Do you reckon it'd be a full hour? I've got
Nah.
97% battery. Should be fine.
Yeah,
Should be.
I think we're good. Yeah, we're gonna give it a shot. We're gonna play the lottery right here. Are you ready to win the game?
Let's go. Let's go.
All right, Greg. So it's really, really nice to have you on this episode of the Coach Estrada PE podcast. I'm George, and who are you, Mister?
So I'm Greg Dreyer. I'm in London, England. It's really real pleasure to be here, George. We picked up a conversation after you reached out on Twitter, and we had one call while you were driving. It was a lot of fun, and I'm really looking forward to having a chat. Yeah, so let's kick it off. Let's jump straight in.
So you have a doctorate, right? Yes.
Yeah, I'm actually just 2 weeks about to finish my 14-year career that I've had working in two different universities in London. I'm currently the director of PE at the Centre for PE Sport and Activity at Kingston University, which is in southwest London. And before that, I was at London Metropolitan University. And previous to that, I worked for 16 years in inner London schools where I led 3 different Physed departments and had a lot of fun doing that. Worked with some great colleagues and loads of really great kids. Some very challenging kids, but lots and lots of great kids.
I always say they don't pay you for the good kids. They pay you for the challenging kids, and those are the ones that need us. Those are the ones that need physical education the most. And you have this exciting, awesome thing that you're providing out to the world for free. It's called the MiMove app, right? MiMoves.
Okay. It's called MiMove. We spell it M-I, so you're not the first person to call it me.
I was reading it in Spanish. Sorry. MiMoves. Go ahead. Break it down to us.
You know what, George? You're about the only person who could get away with that, and all credit to you. That's probably a very good excuse. So yeah, MiMove. So yeah, I said I'm about to leave university because we're about to I'm about to go full time on MiMove. MiMove is an app that started. We thought about it way back in like 2017, and then we just started mapping out ideas. And the problem we were trying to solve was that there's so much effort and energy and resources and time that goes into trying to inspire kids to be active. And we've just got no way of knowing if they are active. And without that, we're not closing off the feedback loop, and we don't know if what we're doing is any good. So after the best part of 30 years in phys ed, I thought this is just crazy. Any other sector, and indeed even other school subjects, other school subjects have got, we might not necessarily buy into it, but at least they've got their sort of public exams, and they've got their high stakes exams, and the kids are tested. And so in order for us to replace that, we've gone down some really weird routes, in my opinion, and we've given kids some rather weird tests to see if what we're doing is working. But what we're really trying to do is to get them into physical activity so it's a really great part of their lives. And so we just have to close that feedback loop. So we started then, we found ourselves, I say we, it's my partner and I, we're both teachers, and we found ourselves in the world of app development, and it was great fun, and we learnt loads. And how we'd actually bring this to life. And yeah, we've been launched just about 16 months, and there's about 214 schools who are using it around the world. Most of them are in the UK, but we're in a total of 21 countries. I think there's 3 or 4 schools in the US at the moment. And we're seeing some really, really phenomenal results. And it's really simple. It's a self-reporting app. The kids log their activity on their mobile device. It takes them about 2 seconds, 3 seconds. We kept it really user-friendly, really simple. And then the teachers can log into the back end, and you can see literally what every kid has done. You've got a really neat dashboard that gives you at-a-glance data about how active the children in your school have been. You can filter it by boys, by girls, by different grades. It's really cool, and as I say, we're seeing some really encouraging results after just over a year.
So you're telling me 21 different countries. People are excited for this app. I know that you said that you had some really big sponsors that are going to help you support the financial aspect. What is the what is the big unknown for you right now that keeps you up at night? What stresses you out at night right now?
Um, yeah, well, I don't know if it stresses me out. There's certainly a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of, we're trying to do something that's never been done. So the first thing is getting schools to just see the sheer simplicity of the need to do it. Everything we do needs to be driven by knowledge and information. And in Physed, we're just not used to that. So in some ways, that culture shift of having strong evidence, strong data, if what you're doing is turning kids onto physical activity, you should absolutely be doing more of it and you should be celebrating it. But first you have to know if they are being turned on to it. And then you shout really loud. If you've got parity between preteen and teenage boys and girls in physical activity, you're bucking international trends, and you should be saying, hey, you know what, I'm doing an absolutely fantastic job. And we want to equip PE teachers to be able to do that just the same way as English teachers can say about the impact that they're having on reading age and the impact they're having on exam success and all other things, because that's our lane. We're about getting kids into physical activity. So the first thing we really have to really understand is is the user barriers, the user obstacles, who's the early adopters. We've been doing a lot of work on really looking and working very closely with our early adopters and really trying to identify what is it why they got excited about it very quickly. We've had schools, we've had one of these conversations and the next day the app is open for every kid. And then we've had other schools, schools are complex places, and because we're providing to schools, it's got to go through the administration. There's a lot of things that some schools check and other schools just say, they look at it and say, yeah, we really need that. So understanding that is important. And then the next phase for us is really understanding the user behaviors of the young people themselves. And we've seen some schools get really, really good traction, like virtually every kid, 85, 90% of the kids are using the app very regularly. And we've had other schools where the traction was not as good, and sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. So we're really understanding the relationship between the teachers and how the app is used, and what the teachers are doing to get really good traction on the app. And then as we grow, we then put more into the app so that the app can be, if you like, standalone and really grab the kids' attention irrespective of what the school's doing about that. But we really want the two to be working very closely together.
So about that data that you're collecting, what you've noticed, and it's been really cool, is that you're seeing that girls are more active than boys. Is that what the...
So we've obviously been, for most of our launch, we launched just before the pandemic. And then the pandemic hit in the UK. That was in March 2020. So just exactly a year ago. And in lockdown, it was certainly pretty consistent that girls were more active than boys. And I think that's reasonably straightforward to explain in the, I think the sort of activities that the girls were doing was less of a sea change to their usual activities. So a lot more, loads of dancing. We saw loads of dancing reported on the app. Lots of individual activities, lots of workout-based activities, walking, some running, because that was all that was available to the young people. In the UK, schools have been returned. All schools are back for now 4 weeks, and so we're just seeing loads of new data come back. At first, it looked like there was actually a drop in activity levels when the children went back to school. And we've again been talking to schools about why that might be the case. And it was probably easier for young people to schedule a daily activity when they had slightly more control of their time. And also the importance of family in that relationship and in that process. And of course they've got schoolwork back on, and they're busier, and their energy is probably very different, and they're going through a huge transition. You've got young people who haven't been in school for a year, and boom, suddenly they're straight back in. And
Exhausted.
it's tough. It's really tough.
Like the teachers too. Oh,
Absolutely.
100%. So
Absolutely.
so if you were to just be speaking to somebody, I got maybe my 50 listeners right now that are awesome people that like, what would you tell them the MiMoves app is going to do for them, and why they need to do it as soon as possible rather than later?
Well, it's really, I hope I'm not oversimplifying it, but we can't plow on in the dark. Right? If you do X, you need to see the outcome Y. Like everything we do is infusing, inspiring the kids to get active. Like, are they active? And if they're not, as I said, if they are active, celebrate. And if they're not active, then great. Make professional decisions, have professional lines of inquiries, having professional conversations with the youngsters themselves, with the parents. How can we do this better together? And that all starts with the data. And I often just draw the analogy, and we've been doing a few conferences actually lately, where this has been a really recurring theme. So I draw the analogy with, if you're running a McDonald's restaurant, what's your key data? Your key data is how many burgers are you selling, right? Like, what else do you want to know? And if you're selling a lot of burgers, like, you might just say, well, you know what, we're doing great. Let's just keep everything as it is. And if burger sales drop, then you got to start asking the questions. But you can't do either of those options unless you've got a really good printout and an accurate record of how many burgers you're selling. Now, do we really think that a McDonald's restaurant owner does not know how many burgers they sell? Of course they do. They probably know to the single hamburger, right? And because that's what all their metrics are geared up to do. And that's why, whether we love them or loathe them, McDonald's is a phenomenally successful global brand. And part of that is their metrics are just off the scale good. And, we're in the business actually of, we're not selling in that commercial space like McDonald's are, but we are trying to sell a behavior. We're trying to sell a product that brings wonder to people's lives. We all get into this because we've generally benefited hugely from what physical activity brings to our lives. And that's a very subjective thing, by the way. If you ask lots of adults why they're into physical activity, they give you a lot of different answers. And another part of this conversation is, one of the things that MiMove gives us is a huge amount of insight into each and every child. There was an 11-year-old kid in the United States, actually, and I won't give you any more geographical location than that. And every single time this kid posted, the kid mentioned squirrels. So the kid would write things like, so MiMove asked them what activity they did, how long they did it for, where they did it, and how it made them feel. And it's that last question we think is by far and away the most important. And then they've got a space where they can free write anything they want, and they can upload photos of the experience if they wish to. And this particular kid, everything was to do with squirrels. Went out on my bicycle, saw 4 squirrels. When walking with Dad, we saw some baby squirrels. It was great. Chased squirrels around the park. It was a great workout and had lots of fun. And it was all around squirrels. Now, if you're the teacher, what's going on there? And how do you relate to that? And now, of course, I don't know that child at all. I couldn't tell you anything about that child apart from their age and their gender. And but if I was teaching that child, I'd think, well, you know what, there's certainly some affinity with nature going on there. There's a kid who likes being and is really observant about the space that's around them. Now, whether I can fully accommodate that, I'm not going to bring squirrels in, but there's clearly a love of the outdoors. So hey, could we get this kid doing much more activity outdoors? Maybe the gym doesn't really work for that kid. So maybe a little bit of an extreme example, and that's exactly why the child's posts caught my eye, because it was somewhat unusual. But I also thought it was really intriguing. The other thing we see in what the children write, going back to this subjectivity of how they're finding meaning in their own physical activity, is that social relationships are off the scale important. So many times they say, I had loads of fun, I was doing this with mum, I was with my cousins, whatever it was. It's all about who they're with. And, you know, if we think about teachers, how often do we say, you know, certainly, you know, as a young teacher myself, I clearly remember older teachers saying to me, oh, don't put those two together, they get up to no good. It's like, that's probably the exact reason why they should put them together, not because they get up to no good, but because they're actually friends. You know, and so again, what we expect from children is so different to what we expect with adults. How many adults, like, you know, message your friends or get on Strava or whatever, hey, who's coming out for a bike ride? And you go because you're motivated by being in that company. How do we bring that into the world of children, and indeed allow them to grow and understand what their whys are, what motivates them, what their preferences are. And I think the really interesting question is, where do my preferences come from? And am I cool just sticking with my preferences, or do I want to expand my preferences? And I think as educators, one of the key roles that we have is to expand preferences, because the more things you like doing, the more wonderful your life generally is.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. You know, there's such a greatness and variety of physical activity that you can do. Back to that kid with the squirrels. I got a game called Squirrel in the Tree Houses. I'd play that with him. He'd love it. Social interactions. When we talk about social interactions, that is the key to a healthy person. You know,
Absolutely.
how are we going to get these kids that are really good friends, but they're a little naughty? You know, how are we going to get those kids to have teachable moments where, like, hey, this is not the time for that. You can have as much fun as you want as long as you're following the rules.
Yeah.
But it's not the time for that. Okay. You do that somewhere else, you know, in your safety of your own home. And then finding the why for physical activity for kids, that's a huge concept. I mean, the kids only you know, they're big sponges, but they can only see what's in front of them. They're not thinking about a big old freaking weightlifting competition in the Olympics. What are they thinking about? I like that girl right there. She's doing lots of flips on the screen, Mr. Estrada. I want to be like her. I'm like, I'm gonna teach you the basics. I'm not gonna make you flip like that girl, because that girl is a beast. I mean, Simone Biles is the greatest of all time. I mean, we all want to be like Simone Biles in some way or some fashion. I mean, Olympian, so kind. And you look at her, she's giving hugs to her teammates. I focus on that. Like,
Exactly.
she has her teammates. She is the great, but she's humble, but she's kind, she's friendly. How can we build the why? How can we build all those social things that are healthy relationships? I mean, that's what our job really is as physical educators. Yes, you know, we need this data, but how can we build great relationships and let the students foster and blossom in their own personality, you know, without always being super strict, you know?
Yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
you know, so my question to you now.
No, I
Right.
totally agree. I totally agree. And I think, you know, one of the things that I don't think we've been really good at is holding on to the spirit of what you just said, George, because whether it comes from public policymakers, whether it comes from within our own profession, whether it comes from external forces like the fitness and health industry, the health rationale, and by health rationale I mean do this because it brings it reduces the risk of chronic disease, non-communicable diseases, heart disease, diabetes, etc. when you're in middle age, you know, and perhaps even more perniciously, do this because it gives you a particular body shape and it avoids fatness. You know, those messages are universally extremely common, and I worry when we let phys ed, we pass phys ed over to that, and it becomes an extension of the fitness industry, but for young children. And we're telling children to do this because it will stop you being ill, because it will bring health benefits. And health is framed in a really narrow way. You know, what you were just saying, you were framing health in a really positive way. And you know, I think if I caught you right, you said social interactions are the essence of a healthy being. And you know, they don't tell you that in the gym. You know, you don't have a conversation with the treadmill, do you? You know, or the weight stack. You know, now I've got, don't get me wrong, I've got nothing against adults going to the gym. For me, you know, it's a really meaningful place for me. I've missed it during our lockdown. We're still not allowed to go there. That doesn't mean I'm going to see the children as a mini version of me. They're not mini versions of me. They've got very different emotional, social, physical needs. And I think I can appreciate the gym because probably through a mixture of Physed or what I know or all the rest of it, like I can make it work for me. And it's that process, and I'm a middle-aged guy, and that doesn't happen overnight. We can't just drop that in to 10-year-olds. 10-year-olds have to get a really positive relationship, not only with others, but first with themselves. They really have to like themselves. They have to like themselves physically. That doesn't mean they have to look in the mirror and think, hey, you look great. It's just they'd need to feel comfortable in their skin. And you know what? If they're looking in the mirror and thinking they look great, fantastic. Why shouldn't they see their beauty in their own selves? And then, and more importantly, or as importantly, if they've got that, then if they feel good in their own skin when they're moving, in whatever way, whether they're dancing, whether they're skating, whether they're throwing a frisbee around, if they feel good in themselves, and then they're looking at elite performers like Simone Biles and or LeBron James, and understanding that that is part of a process. And one of the things that they love, I think we all love, is learning things, is making progress with things, being able to do things that we couldn't do 2 months ago. Again, during lockdown, a lot of people have I think it's been a little bit of a burden actually to say, oh, you must use the time productively. You've got to learn a new language or a new craft, and that takes a lot of doing. And some people have done it fantastically. My youngest son has taught himself to play the guitar, and our house is now full of guitar, probably from morning to tonight, and of course I love having music in the house constantly. But and one of the things I did was think, okay, you know what, I can't go and work out anywhere, so let me try different ways of working out. So I've been trying to get into the whole calisthenics things, and trying to do things that I never thought I'd be able to do. I still can't really do them, but I could do them a little bit less than I couldn't do them before. But it's that journey, isn't it? If you're patient with yourself, you really enjoy learning things that at first look impossible. Like the whole push-up thing when your feet are not on the floor, and you think, nah, that defies gravity. But you know what? YouTube's a fantastic thing, and you can unpick it, and that is the learning journey. And I think that is a really wonderful part of helping kids be physically educated. Like, let's figure out, what are the steps to be able to do a tumble routine? We're not going to start with that, but what are the steps? What do I have to do? And you know what? If you make some progress, hey, that's a W. Let's take it.
A lot of times when people speak about health, that's what you just explained, is no, this is prevent this, prevent that. But we should focus on what they should be doing. We should be focusing on motivating on doing the right thing. What is the right thing? Being kind to others and working out together and challenging each other. And one of the big focus that I always have is like when somebody doesn't do it right, you just say, nice try. It cost you anything to say nice try. And when they do it right, great job, or awesome, or give them a high five or an elbow or whatever, fist bump. And that's gonna, build healthy relationships, which is what I love. And when it comes to gyms, there are a reason why it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, because it's addicting and it's healthy and it's awesome, but it could also be detrimental. But like you're saying, if they have that positive self-image, then they can have a positive relationship with the gym and use it as a tool, as a coping mechanism, as a prevention. And, what does the data say? Older women are so prone to osteoporosis, but if they're stretching and they're doing yoga and they're doing any kind of weight-bearing exercises, they're way less likely to have big issues with osteoporosis. Well, why shouldn't they be in the gym? Everybody should be in the gym. Women, men, kids, at the right level for their right abilities and with correct form, and personal image is such a big concept. I mean, when you're teaching your students at the university, how do you teach your future physical education teachers or professionals how to teach positive health, personal image?
That's a great question, you know, and I've done a few podcasts over the lockdown and no one's asked me about that. I love that question. It's one we take really seriously. I'll just say before I jump into that, gyms are also multi-billion-dollar industries because, well, certainly the figures that we have over here is that over 80% of the people who subscribe to them don't ever go or go less once or less a month. And there's huge questions there about how, you know, what's the role of Physed in that body alienation for, you know, great intent but can't follow through on the action, or don't feel that you belong. Like, how can we really unpick that? There's so much to learn from people who want to do something, but then, you know, they can't do it for whatever reason. And you know, it goes back to MiMove. It doesn't sound very comfortable for us, but I think every kid who leaves our programs who is not in regular physical activity, who hasn't found that place for physical activity in their lives, I would now say that's a loss for us, because, you know, we haven't captured that kid. I'm not saying it's an easy process. I was in schools for 16 years. It really isn't an easy process, and we have to acknowledge our losses, learn from them, and we also got to celebrate our wins. You know, because countering that is every kid who was reluctant, who then we've brought into it, and they have found that place and found that bit of magic in their lives. So, you know, we need to be open to those wins and losses. But, you know, going back to your question, and it is a really good question. So our PE teacher education program, we place an awful lot of emphasis in understanding the who is it that you're going to be working with. And we do have input into elementary trainee teachers, as we call them, student teachers, pre-service teachers. But our input, the amount of phys ed that they get is woeful. They get 1 day in a year to prepare for phys ed for what we call primary, and I believe you would call it elementary, so up to the age of 11. So the bulk of our work is with our secondary specialists. So that's 11 to 18-year-olds. They go and work in high schools, but we don't have middle schools very much. So it's secondary education. And we do an awful lot drawing upon critical social theory in understanding who it is you're going to be working with. Because if you don't understand who, then you really haven't got a lot of chance of making progress. So we really spend a lot of time on unpicking social constructs. So what does it mean to be boy, girl? What does masculinity, femininity mean? How can we have discussions around masculinity, femininity in the absence of the body? Well, you can't, because the body is the essence of masculinity and femininity. So we're trying to, we do a lot of work where we allow the pre-service teachers to explore these concepts. We do a lot of work looking at race and phys ed, and assumptions that are made around how kids from certain ethnic backgrounds are able to can legitimately use their bodies in certain ways. We do a lot of work around like overrepresentation of black kids in certain sports, and work backwards from that to see how that will impact on the teachers. Likewise, we look at LGBTQ plus issues around phys ed, because all of these essentially come down to the physical, and how the physical manifests itself, and how does a 10-year-old black boy begin to get a construct and begin to make sense of what it's going to be like to be a 17-year-old black boy. Now, obviously, as a white man, I can't fully answer that, but we can look at the social dynamics that are happening. We can look at the images that are presented to that kid. We can look at and challenge many of the stereotypes that go around with that. You know, we have a lot of students say, yeah, but, you know, oh, isn't it really positive that, you know, they would aspire, they've got loads of role models in elite sport. And, you know, we could then start to unpick, well, is it really positive to fill a 10-year-old's dream, a 10-year-old's head rather, with very low possibility, probability aspirations. And how do you manage that as a responsible adult? This is really problematic, while at the same time, if that kid is genuinely buying in to that low probability outcome, they're going to do that at the expense of other aspects of their lives. And then if the low probability plays out as we would expect the probability to, what else can they go to? So that also allows us to have conversations around overrepresentation in the first place, and how, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many scholars much smarter than me, that overrepresentation is indeed a manifestation of lack of opportunities and equality in other areas of social and professional life, for example. So, yeah, all of that comes down to really trying to understand the social world and the educational world and the broader context that physical education is taking place in. Because, you know, if our trainee teachers think that it just happens in their gym, then they're going to be rather naive and understanding the relationship of that gym, the kid in the gym and the kid elsewhere. They need to get that bigger picture. I hope that answers your question.
There's so much to deconstruct over there. There's I mean, for me, being of color, you know, I'm Mexican American. Luckily, I've seen everything and grown up in a very diverse community in Southern California, and was very lucky to make friends of all sizes and colors and creeds and backgrounds. So for me, it's easy not to assume, but it's also like, how do I set up my kid to succeed regardless of what they look like? How do I get this kid to be comfortable even if they're a little bit heavier in the gym? Like, how do I get them to be like flourishing? That's the goal. Like, so that they flourish with me, then when they go home, they can do whatever they want and try to flourish in other aspects. And like you're saying, if a African or a black person just only sees one way to success, that's a limiting, that's a point of view that's sad, because they could be businessmen, they could be presidents, they could be politicians, they could be, you know, anything they want. And if they want to be a football star, great. If they want to be a basketball star, great. But it's hard. Like, it takes a lot of work. Just like being a businessman takes a lot of work and dedication. And if they want to be a professor at some college, that's a lot of work right there. But I have this point of view where anybody can achieve many things and be successful at many different things, but it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of dedication. And us as physical education teachers, we need to let them know that. Not in a mean, stern way, but just let them know that whatever you want to do, you can achieve it, but you have to be working hard. If you want to get any kind of goals, you got to be working out 3 to 5 days a week. I'm not going to tell you what to do exactly, but I'm going to give you all these variety of options, and do what makes you happy. Do what's going to bring you joy, and do things that are going to bring your family joy, your siblings. Don't stress them out. Don't beat them up. Don't be mean to the little 3-year-old. Be kind. Get them to play too. Find simple games for you and your family to be together, because we don't know what goes on when they go home. We don't know what their living situation is. Are they in a trailer? Are they in an apartment? Do they have no place to play? But if you give them a variety of activities, then they can figure out the best one for their home life situation and their family. And unfortunately, there are a lot of kids that have, you know, role models that don't push physical education or physical activity. And our job is to do that, you know, and that puts a lot of more effort and pressure and stress on us teachers. But
Yeah,
just,
no, I agree.
but like we were saying, anybody can try to be successful in any aspect or any career, you know. And if you explain that to your students and your other people that you work with, then they are open-minded. And I think that's what we need to be as teachers. Would you agree?
No, I do agree. But I think the only thing I'd say in response to that is, and yeah, I really appreciate that this brings sensitivity and a degree of discomfort at times for many people in around the whole conversation. And I think that the messages clearly need to be managed sensitively, and they need to change with as the children grow and as they grow into young adults. But I think we have an obligation to tell a truthful whole story. So the only problem I have with the full aspiration, maybe we over here we would call it the American dream ideal. And don't get me wrong, it's as much perpetuated and pushed in British schools as it would be in American schools, that if you work hard enough, anyone can achieve anything. I just think the youngsters need to hear that, but they also need to hear, but some of you will have challenges, obstacles, and barriers that others will not. So just to give an example from, you're wearing a United shirt, Manchester United track top, and it looks pretty cool, if you don't mind me saying, George. I'm not a United fan, but I'd appreciate your top. Okay, look, Manchester United, is in a hyper-diverse city in Manchester, in northwest of England, and they're obviously, a global brand. Now, Manchester has got a really thriving, vibrant, and populous Asian community, and we call Asian in the UK, we refer to Asian as being of Bangladeshi, Pakistani, or Indian descent. So it's Southwest Asian, and I understand in the States you refer to Asian more as Southeast Asian descent, right? Okay, so because of historical factors and the British Empire, etc., a lot of cities in Britain have got a high population of what we refer to as British Asians. So why has Manchester United never fielded an Asian player? So you've got a 12-year-old kid who's a superstar soccer player who's of Indian heritage. Now, the assumptions that some coaches, and to get into high performance sport, obviously the kid's got to work super hard. The kid's got to be very lucky, avoid injuries, all of that. But they've also got to be seen to be the right sort of person for the key people who are making decisions. And if the decision maker is holding rather strange ideas about the physicality of Asian kids, or the determination of Asian kids, or any other stereotypical cultural trope related to Asian kids, then that Asian kid has got more barriers to overcome than maybe their white or black counterparts would have. And therefore, as an educator, I don't want to say to that kid, you know what, you've got no chance. I want to say to them, look, this is what you're going to have to navigate. And this is some of the strategies that you might have to turn to. For many years, young black boys had the same issues in soccer as well, which is really surprising now when you look at the diversity, or rather the proportions of black and white soccer players. The England football team itself, the international team, starts with 7 or 8 black players. But for many years, there was all sorts of cultural tropes, and it's really well documented, the racism that many of the pioneering black footballers encountered when coaches thought...
And still encountering.
Still are, absolutely. Well, they're encountering it much more from the terraces, from the fans, and indeed only yesterday or 2 days ago, there was a horrible incident on the pitch as well, in a Rangers soccer game. I think it's I'd like to say it's less common amongst the coaches, but I'm not really in a position to make an accurate judgment of that. But certainly, there was all sorts of stereotypes attached to black players who could only play in certain positions, explosive, fast positions, not decision-making positions. They could only play in warm weather. They weren't very good in the middle of winter. They didn't have real resilience and physicality. Now, lots of that stuff has changed, but we live in a really, really hyper-diverse country, like you were explaining in Southern California, and that doesn't reflect in all walks of life. We've been talking about soccer, but the same goes to certain universities, certain professions, etc. Now, again, it's not that you shouldn't go for that, but if you're going to go for that, know that one, you might be a pioneer or a near pioneer. You might be a trailblazer. You might encounter things that are really uncomfortable. you know, how do we work with that? And you know, don't get me wrong, those kids are probably much smarter than someone like myself in dealing with that. It's not been part of my life, but certainly facilitating the conversation, I think it needs to be part of the aspirational agenda there.
You know, when I took the college course, sociology of physical education, that was a eye opener. And you know, just like coaches would say that, you know, African Americans could turn their hips faster than white people.
Yeah.
And that right there, it's you just like things like that are the assumptions and the inferences that have been passed on generation after generation, and coaching like it's a trip. It's unfortunate because anybody can work really hard and not be successful because of who they know, and genetics. Genetics play a huge role for any hyper performing athlete. I could be practicing my whole life to try to be a really, really good basketball player, but I'm only 5'7". I mean, I don't have the I don't have the, you know, the capacity to compete with those big guys in the NBA. Those guys are just, you know, so if you look at the NBA, it is the most fit sport out of all the sports in the world. It's a trip because the demographics is that the NBA has the most players where both parents are likely to have played college sports.
Okay.
But now it's even changing now that there's a lot of new African athletes coming in from, you know, the continent of Africa, Nigerian players and all kinds of descents. And they're really gifted in many different ways. They're just going to have to work on their skills. But it's a trip that genetics plays such a big role. But at the end of the day, when we're teaching our 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, they don't care about genetics. They just know they're having a fun time. They just know that they love playing soccer. Yeah. Go play soccer as much as you want. Go play something else now. Go play this now. Go try this out. And having these healthy relationships with physical activity is the key to making kids want to be on the MiMoves app, making kids want to have a Strava, or what is any fitness tracker. I have my fitness tracker on, you know, my Apple Watch, whatever. But you know, how do we get them pumped up to be going outside and trying different things out? I think it's weird because, you know, I think weather does play a role. Do you have an opinion on weather and physical activity? Because I know you guys get a lot of rain. Every once in a while, you'll get some sunshine. But London's really sunny compared to the rest of the UK. And, you know,
well, it's a little bit drier. I wouldn't say it's sunny, but does it play a role? It plays a role if we let it play a role. And when I say we let it, I'm talking about, you know, society, the community as a whole. You know, if we're super risk averse, that if children go out in the rain, they're going to get colds, and you know, they're more likely to slip over or hurt themselves. If we keep perpetuating those messages, then it's a barrier. If you know, there's a wonderful Russian proverb that no such thing as bad weather, there's just poorly equipped or poorly attired people. You know, if you've got the right surface to play on, which is basically anything but tarmac, anything but concrete, and unfortunately a lot of our elementary schools, certainly in the urban areas, they only have a playground, an outdoor area that is concrete, and that is really hard if it's wet. You know, it does become slippery. But if youngsters have got grass, or if they've got artificial turf, then they could do anything on that. But again, then you've got the school keeper, or the janitor, as you would say. I don't know if your janitors look after the grass in schools, but ours would, or they would have like ground staff. If you know, if you
depends on the situation. In California, we had a big grassy field, and in Montana, where I'm teaching now, we have to go across the street to the park, and the city takes care of the park.
Okay, so that was exactly the same in my last high school that I worked in. Like literally next door was a park. Now, if that's permitted, if the relationship between the local authority and the school makes that okay, then we would just walk the kids next door, and that was absolutely fine. If they start saying, well, 1 minute, this needs to become a financial transaction, you need to start hiring those pitches, then we would have probably said, well, there's no way we could afford it. Like, we can't give you whatever $30 an hour for every lesson that we're going to be teaching there. It's prohibitive. So again, you know, if we want our youngsters to, you know, to use the lovely word that you use, George, if we want them to flourish through physical activity, we've got to create an ecosystem where that is really viable. So, you know, does weather play a part? No one really likes being wet, but, you know, when you go out in the rain, and this is one of the things that we've learned in lockdown as well, a lot of people have become very weatherproof. And, you know, I've been out on my bike all through the winter, and I've never done that ever. I love riding my bike, and, you know, and people realise, you know what, if you wrap up all right, and even if it is raining, it's only a bit yuck for like first 5 minutes, and then you just get on with it. But that does take a particular mindset, but I think that mindset can, you know, it can be put across to young people, and because I think young people just mimic what they see as the norm, and adults set the norm. So, you know, even going back to the genetics conversation, and I don't want to make out, because I really don't believe that phys ed has got a lot to do with elite sport, really. I think, no, well, I just don't think there's a lot there. But, you know, talking about the NBA players who have had two college athlete parents, you know, of course, you know, I'm not a geneticist. I don't know a lot about that, and I wouldn't claim to. But from a sort of from a sociological perspective, it would also mean that those two parents have found a really special place and had a lot of success in sport and physical activity. So they're much more likely to be throwing a ball around, running around, tumbling around, playing with that growing up child. So the number, you know, I don't buy into the 10,000 hour theories, but just imagine how many times that kid has handled a ball by the time they got to the age of 5. You know, over here we talk a lot about vocabulary gap. So children from better off backgrounds, it's something like 2.5 million more words that they've heard by the time they start school than kids from much more deprived backgrounds. From a phys ed perspective, some kids are much more privileged in that they've just had loads more play activity around them. And I'm not demonizing parents. You know what? I've worked with kids whose parents were holding down 3 different jobs and working all around the clock just to put food on the plate. You know, are they really going to go and throw a tennis ball with their kid, you know, in the park when they get home from work? Maybe, or maybe not. It depends how much energy they've got and how many other kids they've got and what's going on in their life. So we can't make unreasonable assumptions about what being a good parent is. But, you know, if you've got 2 very high performing parents, you know, and it's the same with musicians, you know, if they're hearing music all the time, you know, how many world-class musicians have come out of gospel traditions, and, you know, just to grow up immersed in those sounds. You know, you're telling me that it doesn't make an impact? Of course it does. So kids absorb what they see, what they hear, and they mimic movement patterns. So if they're seeing that all the time, you know, if they're seeing what it means to jump with power, to run with fluency, to change direction, to send and receive a ball, you know, that soon becomes very very second nature, does it not?
Oh yeah. No, you got, and you know, genetics probably does play a role, but like you're saying, all that, the more opportunity for them to become physically literate and then they're going to thrive in the physical world. And the same thing with anybody that, you know, hangs out with an Irish person for over an hour, then you are hearing over 3 million more words, you know, within the first couple of years, you know. Yeah. But no, like,
I think our challenge, if you excuse me, I think our challenge is, you know, what do we do with the kids who are not seeing that in their early years?
A lot of things. We do a lot. We do a lot. And and like you're saying, how do we foster and give opportunities? What would you tell a teacher that is struggling with the kids that don't want to do anything, the ones that are sitting down and giving up as soon as they make one mistake and they have no coping mechanisms for failure? What would you tell them, Greg?
Yeah, well, buckle up, because it's going to be a long ride, and you know, but that doesn't mean we don't go there. That it's part of learning, and probably for those kids and for many kids, you know, what they learn in phys ed, what they can learn in phys ed, is, and I don't think it's exclusive to PE. And indeed, if these lessons are going to be, if they're going to be successfully learned, I think it's an obligation for the whole school to buy in, because the same kids are going to be looking, or some kids, they're going to be looking at a book, reading a line and then shutting it because they think it's too hard, or they're going to be looking at their math sums and, oh, no, I'm just no good at that. So it really is a mindset around, really trying to understand what sort of experiences lead to that, and what do we do? Are we part of the problem, or are we part of the solution? So if we keep framing, for example, success in Physed at being the athletically most competent, then the sort of responses that you just explained are, I'm not saying they're great, but they're more understandable. If a young person thinks, well, I'm not going to be able to succeed in that because there's no way I can run as fast as her, then why should I try? Then we're framing success wrong. If we are giving tasks that really are not in that sweet spot that I can just do, or that perfect challenge spot, and again, I'm not saying it's easy to do that when you've got a class of 30 odd kids, but if we're setting the challenge wrong, then that's an understandable, not an ideal, but it's an understandable response from a young person who might be going through, trying to discover who they are and what they are, and might be not wanting to fail in public. Now, we teach a really public subject area, don't we? Everyone can see who can do it and who can't do it. So, just thinking about the environment that we're putting those youngsters in, and just really trying to try as hard as possible to avoid the deficit in the kid. Oh, there's something wrong with that kid. They've got no perseverance, and really trying to think, well, how can we foster perseverance, and how can we change the context, the environment, the task, the social setting, whatever it is, or even the activity sometimes, to be more relatable. So you've got to get that connection. One connection, you hope one connection, and you can keep it on a positive. But we also know that you can have hundreds of positive connections and a couple of really negative experiences, and you can undo the frigidity of some of our work. But there's a lot of people who are really working wonders all around the world on a daily basis, and we should really be celebrating those folks.
Greg, 2 pointers on times that when kids really struggle with perseverance, and you might have done this many of times, and maybe not on purpose, but you've done it. So you'll see a group of kids not doing well, and you pull 2 from this group, go to that group, 2 from this group, go to that group, 2, and then you see a healthier dynamic. Or you don't, it doesn't, and sometimes you can give, responsibilities to the high performers on really focusing on how to help the person out. And if they're really struggling, I like this activity called molding clay, where they're moving the person's arms exactly the way that they're supposed to do the overhand motion, or they're moving the legs exactly the way that they're supposed to do, just a simple pass. Instead of them hitting it with their toes, or, they're hitting it with the inside of their foot, and they're maybe focusing on helping them do the golf swing, and you give that responsibility. And sometimes it's even the naughty kids. Those are the ones that need the responsibilities in your class the most. They need to be doing extra work, because they need it. They got so much energy. They got something going on, and they just can't focus. But if you set them up for success, you're going to have a way better relationship than if you always shut them down because, they're a little chatty. They're a little all over the place,
Yeah.
But what would you do,
Yeah. So we okay. So sometimes I think, if we want our outcome to be to develop perseverance and resilience, which are, are pretty much buzzwords in education at the moment, then I think we have to think, well, how do we nurture that? So we're very much about, in our work at university, we're very much about explicitness. So we might have lessons where they will be the key outcomes, a series of lessons, and we're going to see if we can work together, because sense of community is really important. We're going to try and cheer each other on. We're going to try and motivate each other to stay on tasks and challenges, that might be challenge, that might be difficult. You might find it difficult. So we're going to flag it up, all right? But success is that you stay on the task, not that you succeed in the task, you stay on the task. And we might just start off with bite size. Like, let's see if you could do this for 5 minutes and progressively add, if we could get up to 10 minutes or 15 minutes, because skills practice is a really important part of learning to move your body better. You have to practice things, but you also have to practice with a review cycle. So there's no point just keep repeating. So then that brings us on to the next part of what we do, and that's we mainly do this with teachers, but it's just as applicable to pass on to the young people. So we teach a model where that I developed when I was doing a lot of work in India. And I was faced with teachers who were coming from a very, very different place to me. They were very, very didactic, very much teacher, bark out what the orders are, expect the kids just to get on with it. And I was like, no, you need to respond to the kids. And after about my first 2 weeks of working out there, I was in my apartment thinking, I'm just getting nowhere here. And I said, right, what is it that we do? How do you respond to the kids? What is it that we see? And since I've been at Kingston, we've been working up this model, and it's basically 3 cues. We talk about seeing 3 different things. And the first thing is a child makes a mistake, okay? And how do we respond if a kid makes a mistake? Now, look, don't get me wrong. There's no magic in this. I'm just trying to describe and unpick what millions of teachers all around the world do on a very regular basis. But doing it, when you've been doing it long enough, you don't even know you're doing it. So the cue is the mistake. The response is ask a question, show them. You can combine the 2 of them. So it could be like, okay, so what am I doing with my hands when I play this volleyball shot? Or you can tell them, okay? And we hold tell, a direct instruction. We hold it back to third. Because we think ask and show is more powerful. Now, there's some very strong advocates of direct instruction, but when I read their work, they also actually believe a lot in asking really good questions. So trying to get the learner to arrive at the answer, sometimes with or without a demonstration, or asking them to look at another child, and then finally tell them. But that's a professional decision, and we're not adamant about what order it goes in. So that's Q1. The kid makes a mistake. Q2 is that it's too easy, and then we apply the acronym STEP. I don't know if you use the acronym STEP. So you either change the space, the task, you tweak the task, you change the equipment, or you change the number of people. So a really simple example would be if we were performing a dance routine, and it's a little bit easy, I might change the task and introduce new components to the dance routine. So I might ask the kids to do it in sync or out of sync, in canon or in synchronicity. I might change the task to ask them to make it twice as long. I might change the people. So we might dance with a bigger group, or I might say, okay, that's too easy. Try dancing that solo, which is for some kids much harder anyway. So changing any of those 4, and we prefer to change it up to make it harder. But in the examples you were given, you could change it down if you need to. We were a bit reluctant to do that because we don't actually think a lot of kids like hearing that's too hard for you, make it easier. And ideally, I mean, of course it happens, but ideally you want the teachers to set the task at the right place. So we actually advocate start off pretty accessible, and then just let them spring. And we also advocate teach step to the kids. So you could just have quick timeout. Okay, you guys, too easy, step it up. And if they can step it up, they don't need you. And kids, I've used that with children as young as 4 or 5 years old. And, it's, they play in a simple game with goals, for example, and you can make it harder just by making the goal smaller. Or if you're focusing on the defence, defending the goal, make the goal bigger, change the space, and you've got a new activity. So that's Q2, and Q3 is about praising when the kids are learning well, then praising the process. But that's probably a whole podcast on praising the process, and that's definitely the one that our student teachers find the most challenging.
I love to give instant feedback as soon as it happens. I mean, and then I also like the delayed reaction feedback too. Like 3 minutes later, we're wrapped up, we're in line, and I'd say, "Hey, I really appreciate how this kid was being so kind and helpful. Hey, I really appreciate how this kid was listening and was on task all day." And you know, when they leave the gym, I have the four different. I got it from the PE specialist, Ben Landers. It's like the wow, the good, not there yet, and then need to keep on trying. So like I don't know which way it goes. It's like blue, green, yellow, red. And they tell themselves how they did on the way out. And they ask me, it's like, how did I do? I'm like, I don't know. You tell me. Like, how did you do? Like, I mean, I did my job. Like, I'm here ready to work at all times. Like, I showed up on time. My equipment was ready. I'm up here. Like, you know, maybe there's a couple of things I could have done differently, but I don't know about you. And then when I have them check in, I've been trying to communicate. When I have a rough day, I'll communicate back like, hey, you know, if I'm happy, if I'm silly, if I'm okay, if I'm sad or if I'm worried. And then there's a kid added angry, and I was like, all right, we got angry too. And I was like, and then I get this one. I don't know what do you, you know, I let them be kids, you know, like because if you overcomplicate it, they kind of look forward to telling me how they're doing because it's in 30 minutes of a lesson. I really don't get the time to really have like a full-on conversation like, hey, how was your day today? It's like it's that's the one thing that you know you don't get when you're doing really quick lessons. But you know, I love being able to get any kind of feedback or giving them feedback too, you know, like that's so important. We
No,
could
and
have a go
I
ahead,
said it
Greg.
take a whole podcast to unpick praise process, and then you just gave like three, you know, beautiful examples straight off the bat on, you know, and that's all we really focus on, like just praise what the kid has done that has brought about their progress, praise the process, and you've given, you know, they were kind and they were listening all the way through, and you know, we really value that. We think that is the much more impactful and inclusive than praising an outcome. Hey, great shot, or great, you know, what great goal, whatever it is you're doing. So, but yeah, I coach rugby on the weekend for young people, and a few years ago, you got it. And a few years ago, I've got an assistant coach, and I generally finish with some self-assessment as you described, and I had the cones placed out, different coloured cones. I said, okay, guys, stand here if you think you really smashed it today, and you know, you made you tried your absolute hardest, and stand here if you found it really difficult and you didn't like the session. So all the kids lined themselves up, and my assistant coach really didn't get what I was trying to do, and he went up to some of the kids and said, hey, no way, you're not in this line, you're in the wrong line, and started moving the kids, and I'm like, Max, it's a self-assessment. Just let them. It's not me. You can't do that, man.
Well, you know, and that's a teachable moment for Max. That's a teachable moment for the kids. You know, like what you do is going to be different to what we think you're doing, and what you think you're doing. You know, like what is it like when you have the pictures of like the memes, like, you know, this is my job, this is what people think I'm doing, this is what I do. And it's like, no, kids have completely different perception of the world. And they, like we know, like KISS, you know, keep it simple, stupid, right? That's all we need to do. But we also need to be sharp with our feedback. Like you got it when you see that mistake or the positive reaction happen, you got to be on it, man. You got to be jumping to that opportunity to help out or praise. And I think a lot of teachers, you know, sometimes we get caught in emotions and we're just going through it, and it's like, no, this kid is important. This group of kids needs your energy, needs your everything, because you know there's no guarantee they're coming back. They're gonna be moving on to another school or something's gonna happen. Who knows? But if we can at least give them the best experience in PE and they're leaving like it's better than Disneyland or Disney World or, you know,
PlayStation.
Oktoberfest for you, whatever it is, you know, that's what we need to do for our kids, you know, that we need to just let them have the fun of their lifetime in a safe environment, obviously.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. And that environment, you know, if they're really safe, then that first cue of making a mistake is you know, in some ways, in many ways, is to be celebrated. Because if they're making a mistake because they're trying to do something they've never done before, that's a punch the air moment. That's like that. You can't ask any more of a kid than to put themselves in a place where they're going to make a mistake, if that's where the mistake has come from. And you know, if you've got a really safe environment, it's like, hey, love that mistake. You know, that mistake tells me a lot. Let's see what we can do with it now. Mistakes are brilliant. You know, they've got to be happy to take the risk. And you were talking earlier about the reluctant kid. You know, that reluctant kid is equating mistakes with a bad thing. Mistakes are absolutely the heart of learning in anything. You have to make mistakes. You have to embrace your mistakes. You have to absolutely love your mistakes. You know, for me, one of the best ways of finishing the lesson is, hey, tell me, kids, like, describe the best mistake you made today.
Oh, I like that.
That's a you know, they're really important. They have to know their mistakes, and did anyone overcome their mistakes? Great job.
I love asking them like, "Hey, who raise your hand if you had a great partner?" And then the kid that's like not even paying attention is like, "Did you just see that kid thinks you are a great partner? Do you think they're a great partner?" Oh yeah. Because you know they do zone out, they do space out, but you also got to find ways to positively get them back on track. Not have to always say like, "Hey, you, look at me, sit down and be quiet." You know, like that's not gonna always work for every kid. But what's gonna work is like your relationship with that kid, how you know that, how they know that you truly are not a jerk to them. You care about them, that you want them to succeed, not just in PE, but in everything. Like when you hear their announcements on the PA system, we got Star Student of the Week, you know, Johnny. You know, good old Johnny did something good. You got to be like, "Hey, Johnny, I heard your Student of the Week," and then they're like, "Yeah." You know,
I want
like
to be in
that.
your class, George.
Oh, Greg, you know you would have a blast. You know what you would be doing. You'd be thriving, and then you'd be like making all kinds of friends, even if you didn't like them. They'd be your friends. They don't have a choice. They're gonna be successful with you. But I think we could schedule a couple months from now. We could do a part two because you know there's so much to decompress, and I want to hear the progress. We didn't even get to any of the questions that I really had because
Oh,
you
sorry.
know it's okay. It's all right. No, no, no. We're gonna have to do another one in a couple weeks, and the thing about you know us being educators, being professionals, is that we are always trying to grow and become better. I am not ever gonna stop learning. I am not ever gonna stop trying to be the best husband, friend, you know, skier that I can possibly be in my own abilities, or jogger, whatever it is, you know.
Yeah.
And I got my friends over here that are way gifted in certain things, and I just try to learn as much as I can from them.
That's cool, man. That's really cool, and that's why you take the time to do these podcasts. And I think, you know, on behalf of everyone who listens, that you know, big shout out to you. Just, you know, prioritizing this as a way of you spending your precious time. You know, we're doing this on your Sunday, and you know, I think that's absolutely great, and it's all part of that learning. And it's also that's why you use that magic word earlier. You know, that show them that you care. And
It's
um, it,
true, if you have to.
it's so true. When we do selection for teacher education, we've now brought it, reduced it pretty much to that question. Can we see in the applicants' eyes, their demeanour, their voice? Can we see that they care? Just show us that you care, and then we can work with you. Because I'm not sure we can teach it. But that's a good. Maybe we bump that to the next podcast.
No, that right there, we could go on for 2 hours on that bad boy. But I do like to finish with one final thing. Do you have
Sure.
any questions for me to finish off? That's what you get whatever question you want, Greg. Personal, professional, fun, negative, whatever. What you got for me?
Well, I'd love to know the story of why I'm talking to a dude in Wyoming who's kitted out in Manchester United hat and tracksuit top. Do you even call it tracksuit top?
This is, yeah, I would say this is, I got the, you know, track bottoms, you know,
Okay.
and everything, but because I used to be a track runner. I ran like a 430 mile, nothing crazy, and 10 flat 2 mile,
Decent. Really
nothing
decent.
crazy. Not in California. I mean, those guys
I
over
wouldn't
there
keep up with it.
are
That's
animals. Animals. I love all the competition. But here's the situation. My wife is from Ireland. She's from north of Belfast, a place called Ballygally, County Antrim.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of Manchester United fans in Ireland. I don't know if you've ever heard of George Best, one of the greatest of
George,
all time.
George Best Airport now at Belfast, right? The airport is named after.
Yep. I mean, that guy, that's a party right there. Hanging out with that guy must have been a blast. But here's the story. I fly out to the first time I'm going to meet her family in December after we had a summer camp together in 2012. And I was like, yeah, I like Chicharito, the Mexican player for Manchester United. And her big Christmas present for me was to surprise me with Manchester United tickets. So we flew to Manchester, and it was a blast. I mean, once you go to Old Trafford, you can't not be a fan of Manchester United. So I was hooked for life, and I bought this hat at Old Trafford, and a bunch of other gear.
Yeah.
Anything Manchester United I love, because they've had people like Patrice Evra, who's just a character. They've had Rio Ferdinand. They've had Fergie. I've read both of his books, and I just absolutely love everything Manchester United. And there's always like this global brand image that they have, and they're so inclusive. Like you're saying, the Asian community, that how can you not love them? And then they got Ole Gunnar Solskjaer right now. We've gone through Van Gogh. We've had a couple of characters go through and try to
Yeah.
manage, but it's a hard place to be.
It is, yeah, really tough. It's really tough. But just to finish, then, you mentioned George Best, and if any of your listeners haven't heard of George Best, definitely YouTube him, because the guy was a genius with a soccer ball. But when I was about, gosh, I must have been 10 years old, and after a long and distinguished career for Manchester United, he played for a London club, Fulham. And I had a chance to go and see him, and it was a really big deal. So I went to see this Fulham game, and I can't remember the whole ins and outs of the story, but I was allowed to go autograph hunting, and I found myself at the changing room, at the locker room of Fulham, and I knocked on the door, and I was with my dad, and I really can't for the life of me remember how we got authorization to go to this inner sanctum. I knocked on the door, and my dad said, "I'm with my son. Is it at all possible to get George's autograph?" And he came out without a shred of clothing on, completely naked, and signed my autograph book, and I still got it. But so not only did I get George Best's autograph, I got it while he was completely naked. So
that is a wild story, man, Greg. That is phenomenal. I mean, how could you forget that moment?
No, I never will, for lots of reasons. I was very impressionable 10-year-old.
Are you a Fulham supporter, or
No, not at all.
Who do you support?
I don't really anymore. I used to play pretty serious soccer. My oldest son, we live a mile from Emirates, so at Arsenal.
That's nice. I've been to the Emirates. They were closed the day that I was down there. I should have been friends with you back then. But thank you so much for joining me on the podcast, and we will have another episode real soon.